name is Raina Gilead, and I want to welcome you to another episode of our Fireside Chat series. In this series, we focus on past, present, and future of diverse contributions to the AEC industry. And I also want to re welcome again my co host, Dr. Nicole Hirsch. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Raina. It's so good to see you again.
Yes, always good to see you. Yes. So, this episode, we are talking about Hispanic Heritage Month, which we
That's
are
right.
currently in this season. Is that correct?
That's right. Hispanic Heritage Month runs from September 15th to October 15th, so we're just about to wind down. But yeah, we're right in the middle.
Now, I think one of the things that's really interesting, I mean, there's a lot of things that are interesting within this, but is that it runs from, like you just said, September 15th to October 15th, whereas there's a lot of stuff that it's just 1 month, but this stretches 2 months, which is interesting.
It is, and I never understood why. And it may be the only Heritage Month that I can think of that isn't a proper, solid month, first to the, 30th, 31st type of deal. And what I learned is that Hispanic Heritage was originally celebrated as just a week. It was first celebrated in 1968, and the week of September 15th is important because there are many Independence Days that happened that week. So on September 15th, we celebrate the Independence Days of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. September 16th is Mexican Independence Day. September 18th, we celebrate Chile's independence. And then the 21st is Belize, which is technically colonized by the UK and not Spain. So we can get into Hispanic versus Latino in just a moment. But so that first year, or the early years, I should say, it didn't become a full month until 1988, but that's why we did it the 15th to the 15th.
Wow, so it's all encompassing, which is actually really cool.
It is. And
And
of course, there are many countries who celebrate their Independence Days around the whole calendar, not just in September or October. But that was the thinking behind the early decision to celebrate it that week.
wow.
Mhm.
See, we're learning stuff I always learn stuff in this series, and I'm in the series. So
Listen, I did some research. I had never known that until I did the research for this episode. So I'm glad to now know that. I mean, the other thing that's really interesting about Hispanic Heritage Month is that it's really tied to a history of colonization, right? When we're talking about Hispanic, that really means related to Spain or the Spanish language. Many people instead use the language of Latino or Latinx, which more so encompasses countries that are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And one of the things that I read in doing my research from the National Museum of the American Latino is that um, it's understood that Latino leaves more room for folks to lean into their diverse racial identities. What's unique about Hispanic is it's the one census category that's not a racial group, it's an ethnic group. So you can be both Hispanic and white or Hispanic and indigenous. And Latino actually, according to this museum, leaves more room for that kind of identification.
wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, again, I definitely, in terms of some of the places that you mentioned, I actually did my last semester study in college in Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
And that is one of the places, like you're saying, people with a mixed identity, a mixed heritage, but still identifying as being Latino or Hispanic, definitely Caribbean, obviously. But you have Black Puerto Ricans, like you said, you have, white Puerto Ricans. So this idea of race versus culture. And then another piece is language,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Exactly. And I think to your point, there's so many cultures that fall under this broader scope of Latino or Latinx or Hispanic, right? I mean, Puerto Rican culture is so different from, Mexican culture or Guatemalan culture or, what have you. There's so much diversity under this ethnic umbrella.
yeah, Absolutely. And even nuances within the language. And I say that just because the time that I did spend in Puerto Rico, one of the reasons I went to Puerto Rico for me personally was at the time for college, I got a major in basically media, communications, sound editing, things like that. And so, kind of similar to elements of the AEC industry, simplifying it down, it's something like, for example, being an engineer, having to deal with numbers and measurements. Numbers and measurements we can all agree on kind of across the board around the world. So for me, I am bilingual. I do speak Spanish, and I wanted to be able to enter the industry both on an English capacity, but also on a Spanish capacity, which kind of brings me to how we tie this into AEC and how Hispanics, Latinos are showing up in that industry, percentage wise, or things like that.
Yeah. And we touched on this just a little bit in one of our earlier conversations about cultural competency, but I think you're right. This question around language is really crucial. And so, uh, in terms of percentages, of course, you know me, I did a little research. Um, and what I found is that we know that Hispanic or Latinos comprise about 18% of the US population. Um, and they also are represented as about 30% of the construction industry. So they are a huge chunk of the construction industry, and that number has been on an upward trend, so it's growing. On the other hand, we see much smaller numbers than their representation in the general population when it comes to architecture or engineering. So just under 10% of the engineering workforce is Latino or Hispanic, and only 6% of architects are Latino in the US. So we see an underrepresentation in architecture, engineering, and an overrepresentation in construction. And when we're thinking about what that means for the future, I mean, who can predict the future? But I think it is important to think about what are the different cultures? How are we celebrating the language? I know my husband, who works in the construction industry, is learning Spanish because a lot of his team is Spanish speakers. And so these are the kinds of things that are celebrated about the diversity of our workforce.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, I think, language is one of those things that connects us or can separate us. But in the positive sense, when you're thinking about a workplace, like you mentioned with your husband, it's one of those things that I would say, like at Lester and at hopefully a lot of other companies, that we're taking on this diversity and including it into the fabric of the company. So all of these different ways where we can celebrate who we are and celebrate also like the advantages of being bilingual, trilingual, or even just in a work environment where there are multiple languages that are able to be spoken while doing business. That's
Yeah,
cool.
I totally agree. And I think one thing that maybe isn't we didn't say explicitly is that what's unique about this Heritage Month celebration is that it's a wide array of cultures that share a common language. Whereas, for example, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we're thinking about lots of different cultures, lots of different languages too. And so it's interesting that language is the through line. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing you pointed out is this question of how do we celebrate? And so I'd love to talk about how do we celebrate? What are some ways that you've seen or that we could celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month in the workplace?
Well, one thing that I love, and this goes across all cultures, but if we're sticking with our topic at hand, food. I love food. I love food of all kinds of cultures. I've actually started getting into like my own culture of different foods and things. So I would say one of the ways I would want to participate and celebrate is to encourage like maybe work potlucks or bringing food from different Hispanic and Latino cultural dishes or appetizers, or who doesn't like to get together and eat food?
100% agree. I'm
Yeah.
here for the potlucks or however that celebration might look. Another thing that we can think about in terms of kind of Heritage Month celebrations in the workplace are important figures, historical or contemporary, who are trailblazers in your industry, the art and culture beyond food. For example, Raina and I are both from the Bay Area, and the murals on the buildings in the Mission District are just an incredible display of that community's artistic expression, but also ties to uh, Mexico and the tradition of muralists in Mexico. So there's a beautiful way to think about that in the way the art shows up in the architecture and on the buildings, right? And so there's different ways we can think about what are the pieces of culture that we want to celebrate. So yeah, food, arts, important figures. These are some of the wonderful ways that we can celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month before it comes to a close.
Absolutely. We still have a little time, which is great.
Yeah.
Um, I would say also, we also just have to touch on, in terms of being a workplace, the sensitivities of everyone in the workplace and what people are going through, not just personally, but even more so broadly in the culture and climate of our society right now.
Think that's right. And part of this is connected to our conversation about cultural competency and being aware of what is culturally appropriate for different groups, but also in this external political climate, you certainly don't want to celebrate in a way that might put someone at risk or make someone feel really uncomfortable. So that's something to keep in mind in your celebrations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is great. I'm excited.
Me too. I hope you do something food related
Yeah,
before this Heritage Month is out.
absolutely. I'm going to start putting my plan together. I'll invite you so you'll
I
know too.
can't wait. I can't wait. Let's do it. All
All right,
right.
great. Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thank
And yay to
you.
another episode.
Yeah, happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yes, happy Hispanic Heritage Month.